The courtroom was silent, the air thick with anticipation. Jessica Andrews stood accused of poisoning her wealthy employer, Richard Donovan. The evidence was stacked against her, and the judge was ready to deliver the final verdict. Then, a small, trembling voice cut through the tension. "I have something to say." All eyes turned to Nathan Donovan, the 8-year-old boy in a wheelchair clutching his cell phone like a lifeline. His voice was fragile but unwavering. "You all need to see this." What he revealed next left everyone frozen in shock. Want to know what happened? Watch until the end and don't miss this story full of shocking twists. Also, tell us where you're watching from in the comments and subscribe for more incredible stories like this. Jessica Andrews had always carried a wound that never truly healed. As a teenager, she watched helplessly as her younger sister faded away from a mysterious illness, one that doctors could neither diagnose nor cure. The haunting memory shaped her future, driving her to dedicate her life to caregiving, hoping to save others from suffering the way her sister had. When Jessica heard about the nanny position at the Donovan estate, it seemed like fate. The mansion itself was an architectural marvel, vast and elegant, resting on the outskirts of the city. Owned by Richard Donovan, a prominent businessman, it housed not just wealth, but deep, unspoken sorrows. Jessica's primary responsibility would be to care for 8-year-old Nathan Donovan, a fragile boy who had lost his mother in a tragic car accident. Since then, he had remained confined to a wheelchair, unable to walk and seemingly trapped in silence. Arriving at the mansion, Jessica immediately sensed the tension hiding beneath the polished marble floors and grand chandeliers. The house staff moved like shadows, polite but cautious. Edmund, the long-serving butler, greeted her with a dignified nod, his expression unreadable. Other workers, like the gardener and the cook, exchanged wary glances as they passed. Despite their hushed conversations, Jessica couldn't help but feel the mansion held a dark secret. Her first encounter with Richard Donovan confirmed the weight of grief hanging over the house. Once a charismatic and doting father, he now seemed distant and brooding. A tall, imposing figure, he greeted Jessica with a formal, almost detached air, as if he had long abandoned the hope of joy returning to his life. The tragedy of losing his wife had changed him, grief and guilt etched into his features. He rarely left his study, and even on the rare occasions when he did, he moved like a man haunted by memories too painful to confront. But it was Nathan who captured Jessica's heart. The boy was small for his age, his pale face framed by unruly dark hair, and his eyes, large, solemn, and untrusting, carried an unmistakable weight. He often stared out the window, watching the wind ripple through the garden flowers, his hands fidgeting with his wheelchair's armrests. Jessica wondered if he ever imagined running through that garden like any other child his age. Determined to earn his trust, Jessica began with simple gestures, a warm smile, a soft story at bedtime. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, Nathan's guarded expression softened. He didn't speak much, but the flicker of curiosity in his eyes encouraged her. Little by little, Jessica sensed a spark, a glimmer of hope trying to break through the sorrow. That gripped him. She never imagined how deeply she would come to care for him, nor how that bond would soon be tested by betrayal and danger lurking within the very walls of the mansion. Days at the Donovan mansion fell into a steady, if somber, routine. Jessica spent most of her time with Nathan, gradually coaxing him out of his shell through stories of courage and resilience. Tales of knights, explorers, and unlikely heroes seemed to spark something deep within him. Occasionally she'd catch a smile, shy and fleeting but genuine. But the mansion itself felt heavy, as though its grandeur served only to mask the tension simmering beneath. The staff remained guarded, their conversations slipping into uneasy whispers whenever Jessica was near. It wasn't just her imagination. The cook's hands trembled when she spoke of the master of the house, and the gardener's eyes darted nervously when asked about the family's past. Then there was Edmund, the butler whose presence seemed stitched into the very fabric of the estate. His posture was precise, his words measured, and though his tone was unfailingly polite, Jessica often felt his gaze lingering, assessing her every move with quiet suspicion. Nathan was her only true connection in the house. His willingness to talk grew in hesitant steps, his voice strained. From disuse but earnest, He confided how much he missed his mother, how he sometimes dreamed of running to her even though his legs would not obey. He spoke too of his father's distant presence, how Richard would appear at his door at night, only to stand in silence before slipping away again. The boy's pain was as evident as his courage. Yet one evening, as Jessica helped Nathan prepare for bed, he uttered something unexpected. His voice was almost a whisper. "I've been trying to walk again." The confession hit her like a jolt. He explained that he had been secretly practicing, forcing his legs to move even when the pain felt unbearable. "I just want to see him smile again," Nathan said, eyes shining with a desperate hope. Jessica's chest tightened. Nathan's determination was nothing short of remarkable, but the secrecy surrounding his efforts troubled her. Why had Richard limited his therapy so drastically? And why did the staff act as though simply mentioning it was a transgression? What she couldn't yet understand was how all of this connected to the restless undercurrent she felt throughout the mansion. But the pieces were beginning to fall into place, even if she didn't quite know it yet. Concerned by Nathan's revelation, Jessica found herself increasingly frustrated with Richard's approach to his son's recovery. The more she learned about Nathan's secret efforts to walk, the more she questioned why Richard seemed so unwilling to support true healing. Even the formal therapy sessions arranged for Nathan were infrequent and superficial, as if meant only to satisfy appearances. Days later, Jessica couldn't contain her worries any longer. She confronted Richard in his study, her voice steady but laced with desperation. "Nathan is stronger than you think. He's fighting so hard to walk again, but he needs real support, consistent therapy, encouragement, hope. You can't just keep him locked away and expect him to heal." Richard's eyes darkened. "You think I don't want what's best for my son?" His words cut through the air like ice. "Pushing him too hard could destroy him. You have no idea what he's been through, what I've been through." "But sheltering him from the world won't help him either," Jessica replied, her own voice trembling now. "He needs to believe he can get better, and right now, he's fighting that battle alone." Their argument escalated, sharp words ricocheting off the walls until Jessica could no longer hold back her tears. As she stormed out of the study, she felt the sting of failure. What good was her dedication if Nathan's own father refused to acknowledge the progress his son was desperate to make? What Jessica didn't know was that Nathan had overheard the argument from his bedroom. That night, he was quieter than usual, his eyes downcast, and his fingers tracing anxious patterns along his wheelchair's armrest. She tried to soothe him with another story, but his focus seemed lost somewhere beyond the words. Later, as Jessica lay awake replaying the confrontation in her mind, she heard a faint noise from downstairs. Curiosity pushed her from bed, and she padded softly down the grand staircase. Light spilled from Richard's study, the door slightly ajar. She approached cautiously, but the scene that awaited her would haunt her for days. Richard lay slumped over his desk, unconscious. A wine glass tipped over beside him. A strange residue clung to the bottom of the glass, its sickly gleam catching the dim light. Panic surged through her veins as she called for help, her voice echoing through the silent mansion. What began as an argument about hope and healing was about to spiral into something far more sinister. The ambulance arrived swiftly, red and blue, lights painting the mansion's walls in frantic flashes. Jessica's hands trembled as she guided the paramedics to Richard's study, her voice barely steady enough to explain what little she knew. They examined the glass, their expressions turning grim as they detected traces of a rare and dangerous poison. Richard was rushed to the hospital unconscious and fighting for his life. Meanwhile, investigators descended upon the mansion like a swarm of vultures, questioning everyone and examining every inch of the estate. Jessica's explanation of finding Richard unconscious did little to quell their suspicion. And then there was the glass. She had wiped it clean earlier that evening, leaving her fingerprints all over it. As the authorities gathered evidence, whispers from the staff began to paint a picture of her as a vengeful, disgruntled employee. The argument she'd had with Richard only hours before seemed like a smoking gun, twisted into a motive of anger and desperation. Reporters swarmed the mansion's gates, their voices carrying sharp accusations and half-truths. News outlets spun stories of a bitter caregiver who'd turned against her employer, all while the real truth remained buried beneath layers of speculation and fear. Jessica's world shrank under the crushing weight of suspicion, her pleas of innocence drowned out by the deafening roar of public outrage. Amidst the chaos, Edmund's behavior grew increasingly unsettling. His usually composed demeanor now seemed strained, his eyes darting nervously whenever the investigation was mentioned. He avoided her questions with curt responses, as if determined to keep his distance from whatever fate awaited her. But Jessica's greatest worry was Nathan. The boy was terrified, his small frame trembling each time he overheard voices raised in anger or panic. His trust in her remained, but even that felt fragile under the constant pressure of the accusations being hurled her way. Left with no real allies and mounting evidence against her, Jessica felt herself slipping into despair. The mansion, once intimidating but beautiful, now felt like a prison, its walls echoing with blame and betrayal. But something far more dangerous than mere suspicion lurked within those walls, and Jessica was about to discover just how deep the conspiracy went. As the days dragged on, Jessica's life became a nightmare of accusations and interrogations. The prosecutor, a man known for his ruthless pursuit of high-profile cases, painted her as an angry, vengeful caregiver obsessed with Nathan's therapy. According to his twisted narrative, Jessica's frustrations with Richard's restrictions had driven her to commit an unspeakable act. Despite her desperate attempts to prove her innocence, every piece of evidence seemed to work against her. Formerly indifferent staff members suddenly provided vague but damning testimonies, claiming to have overheard her arguing with Richard about Nathan's treatment. The media only made things worse, sensationalizing her supposed motive of revenge or greed. Even the few friends Jessica tried to contact distanced themselves, unwilling to be associated with someone presumed guilty before ever standing trial. Yet amid all the chaos, one detail refused to leave Jessica's mind. The night of Richard's poisoning, she had seen someone lingering near the back entrance of the mansion. The footprints in the damp earth had been fresh, the pattern unfamiliar. But when she brought it up to the investigators, they dismissed her concerns, too fixated on building their case against her to consider any other possibility. Adding to her unease was Edmund's increasingly suspicious behavior. She often caught him engaged in whispered conversations with a tall, stern-faced man who appeared more than once during the investigation. His presence was never officially acknowledged, but the way staff members seemed to shrink away from him spoke volumes. Finally, one of the maids, pale and trembling, whispered a name to Jessica in passing. Alden Pierce. She recognized the name from the occasional tense conversations she'd overheard. Alden Pierce, Richard's former business partner, whose career had crumbled following a disastrous deal that allegedly left him ruined. And judging by the way the staff reacted to his name, he hadn't forgiven Richard for his misfortune. Driven by desperation, Jessica began piecing together the fragments of information she had gathered. There was something far more sinister at play than anyone realized, but proving her innocence seemed impossible when no one was willing to believe her. Yet her determination to protect Nathan and uncover the truth remained unshaken, and there was still one person who believed in her, even if he was just an 8-year-old boy, too afraid to share his own secrets. Jessica's world grew smaller with each passing day. Reporters hounded her whenever she stepped outside, their relentless questions chipping away at her sanity. Inside the mansion, the atmosphere was even worse. Staff members avoided her as if guilt could be caught like a disease. Edmund's presence, always so measured, now felt like a constant threat, his narrowed eyes watching her with a wariness bordering on contempt. But it was Nathan's fear that pained her most. The boy had become withdrawn, his already quiet nature slipping further into silence. He spent hours staring out the window, his expression lost and haunted. Desperate to comfort him, Jessica tried to reassure him of her innocence. Nathan would nod, but the weight of his own secret kept his gaze averted. Then one sleepless night, Nathan's quiet sobs pulled Jessica from her restless thoughts. She found him clutching his cell phone, his small fingers trembling around the device. His voice was barely more than a whisper. "I've been filming myself, trying to walk again, to show Dad one day, to make him proud." Jessica's eyes widened. The recordings Nathan had made, his private attempt to rebuild his strength, might be the very thing that could save her. But Nathan's eyes were wet with terror, his breath coming in shallow, broken gasps. "I was recording that night," he admitted. "I was trying to make it to the doors, and I heard everything." The revelation left her speechless. Nathan had been documenting his struggle to walk, hoping to capture progress that would one day shock his father into believing in him again. And on the night of the poisoning, his camera had captured more than he intended. "Can I see it?" Jessica asked gently, though the urgency in her voice was impossible to mask. But Nathan shrank back, clutching the phone as if it were his last line of defense. "If I show anyone, and they see me trying and failing, I'll just be a disappointment. And if I can't walk for real, then what's the point?" Jessica's heart broke for him. His shame and fear were palpable, twisted around his courage like barbed wire. But she also knew that the evidence he held could prove her innocence. Somehow she had to convince him to let her see the truth, and as the shadows around them deepened, she realized her only hope lay in the trembling hands of an 8-year-old. Boy, Jessica's hands trembled with equal parts hope and fear. Nathan's recording could be the key to proving her innocence, but the boy's reluctance was evident. His gaze remained fixed on the floor, his shoulders hunched as if bracing himself for judgment. Taking a deep breath, Jessica crouched down to his eye level, her voice soft and steady. "Nathan, I know you're scared, and I can't even imagine how hard this has been for you. But what you've done is trying to walk again. It's amazing, and it doesn't matter how many times you fall. What matters is that you keep trying." Nathan's eyes glistened with fresh tears, his fingers still clutching the phone like a lifeline. "But what if I never really walk again?" he choked out. "What if I just keep failing?" "Then you keep trying," Jessica replied, her voice firmer now. "Because real strength isn't about never falling, it's about never giving up. And what you've done so far is more than most people could ever dream of." For a long moment, the only sound was the slow, unsteady rhythm of Nathan's breathing. Then, with a trembling nod, he held out the phone. Jessica accepted it with care, her fingers brushing his in a gesture of reassurance. Together they replayed the footage from that night. The shaky video showed Nathan's struggle to push himself upright from the bed, his small legs quivering with effort. His breathing was labored, but determination burned in his eyes. Then came the faint sound of raised voices, Jessica's and Richard's argument echoing from downstairs. But as the recording continued, another sound emerged, faint but distinct, the creak of a door opening, footsteps not belonging to either Jessica or Richard. And then, barely captured at the edge of the frame, a shadow passing by Nathan's partially open bedroom door. Jessica's breath caught. Whoever had entered the mansion that night wasn't supposed to be there, and Nathan's recording had caught it all. But there was more. As the camera continued recording, Nathan's weary voice was captured on tape, strained but defiant. "I just want to see Dad smile again." The raw sincerity in his words left Jessica momentarily speechless. But the urgency of the moment pushed her forward. They had evidence now, evidence that could clear her name. But more importantly, it exposed that someone else had been in the mansion that night, and she knew exactly who she needed to confront. The day of the verdict arrived under a sky heavy with clouds, as if the world itself braced for what was to come. Jessica sat in the courtroom, her pulse pounding in her ears while the prosecutor presented his final argument, a polished, merciless tale of jealousy and betrayal. To them, she was nothing more than a criminal. But before the judge could speak, a small voice pierced the tension. "I have something to show." All eyes turned as Nathan wheeled himself to the front of the courtroom, his thin frame trembling, but his gaze steady. The judge's eyes softened as he granted the boy permission to speak. With hands still shaking, Nathan explained how he had recorded himself trying to walk, his personal documentary meant only for his father's eyes. His voice wavered, but his determination never faltered. "I just wanted him to be proud of me." He held up his phone and a court officer helped project the video onto a screen. The room fell silent as the footage played. Nathan struggled to stand, his face twisted with pain but ablaze with resolve, left the audience breathless. But when the shadow appeared outside his door, a collective gasp rippled through the courtroom. The prosecutor tried to object, but the judge's sharp glare silenced him. The recording continued, capturing Nathan's whispered confession to the camera. "I just want to see Dad smile again." The sincerity of those words struck the courtroom like a thunderclap. Investigators, prompted by the revelation, launched an immediate inquiry. Within hours, evidence emerged linking Alden Pierce to the poisoning. Records of his recent purchase of the rare toxin surfaced, along with testimony from a terrified Edmund who confessed to allowing Alden into the mansion in exchange for a bribe. The truth was undeniable. Jessica's name was cleared on the spot. The prosecutor's expression twisted from arrogance to stunned disbelief as the judge declared her innocent. But Jessica's eyes weren't on him. They were on Nathan, who sat, slumped in his wheelchair, overwhelmed by both relief and terror at having exposed his secret. Weeks later, Richard awoke from his coma. As the truth of what happened unfolded, his guilt and sorrow collided with the overwhelming gratitude of knowing his son was safe. Apologies spilled from his lips, each word heavy with remorse. He begged Jessica to stay, not just as Nathan's caregiver, but as someone the boy truly trusted. The darkness that had plagued the mansion finally lifted. Richard and Nathan began to rebuild their bond, guided by Jessica's unwavering support. And on a crisp morning in the garden, with Jessica by his side, Nathan stood from his wheelchair and took his first confident steps toward his father. Tears of joy and pride filled Richard's eyes, his smile the very gift Nathan had been fighting so hard to see. Jessica's journey had begun with grief and suspicion, but it ended with healing and hope. And this time, she wouldn't let anything threaten the peace they had fought so hard to find. And that's the incredible story of courage, hope, and redemption. If this powerful journey moved you as much as it moved us, don't forget to hit that subscribe button and join our community. We share stories that inspire, thrill, and touch the heart. And trust me, you won't want to miss what's coming next. So, subscribe now and be part of something truly special.